Hello, dear listeners, and a warm welcome to you here at Sleepy and Historian, the quiet corner of the world where we sit together in the soft dark and let the past come gently to life. Tonight we travel back to a cold spring night, more than 100 years ago, to a ship so large that people called it a floating palace, a vessel built to cross the widest ocean in the world in comfort no one had ever known before. On her very first voyage, on a sea as smooth and still as black glass, she struck a wall of ice in the dark and sank beneath the waves in less than 3 hours, carrying more than 1,500 souls down into the deep. She was named the Titanic, and her story has never let go of the human heart. For more than a century, people have remembered this ship and the night she was lost. They remember her because she was the largest moving object ever built by human hands at the time, a marvel of steel and steam and ambition. They remember her because so many believed she could never sink, and because that belief shaped every choice that followed. And they remember her most of all because of the people aboard her, the rich and the poor, the old and the young, families chasing new lives across the sea, who all shared the same terrible night together. This is a story of human dreams reaching as high as they could reach, and of how quickly the sea can humble all the works of people. It is a story of pride and courage, of loss and survival, of a great machine and the fragile lives it carried. Tonight we will walk slowly through every part of it, from the first sketches on paper to the silent wreck that rests on the ocean floor. But before we go any further, I want to take a moment. On this channel, we explore fascinating subjects in calm and careful detail. These journeys are made to help you relax, focus, or simply enjoy the flow of discovery. I would love to know where you are listening from today. Is it day or night where you are? What time is it? Are you tuning in while studying, working, commuting, or simply winding down? Drop your answer in the comments below. It is always wonderful to hear from you. And if you enjoy content like this, please support the channel by liking this video and subscribing. It helps us bring you more of these journeys. Now let us go back to the very beginning, to a time before the ship existed, when she was only an idea forming in the minds of ambitious men. The world at the start of the 20th century was a world in love with machines. It was a time when steam ruled the seas, when great iron ships crossed the oceans carrying people and goods between the old world and the new. The wealthy traveled for pleasure and business, and the poor traveled to escape hunger and find work in faraway lands. Between Europe and America, there flowed a steady river of human lives, and the ships that carried them were growing larger and grander with every passing year. To own the fastest and finest ships on this route was to hold great power and great pride. And so, the shipping companies of that age were locked in a quiet, endless contest to build something bigger and better than anyone had managed before. In those years, the ocean liner was the only way to cross the Atlantic, for there were no airplanes carrying passengers over the water yet. A voyage from England to America took about a week, and during that week, the ship became a small floating town. People ate and slept and walked and talked aboard these vessels, and the comfort of the journey mattered a great deal to those who could afford to pay for it. The richest travelers wanted to feel as though they had never left the finest hotels of London or Paris. The poorest only wanted a safe and clean place to rest their heads while they waited for the new world to appear on the horizon. A great ship had to serve all of these people at once, holding thousands of lives within her steel walls as she pushed through the cold grey waves. The idea of the Titanic was born from this hunger for greatness. A British shipping company called the White Star Line wanted to rule the Atlantic, not by building the fastest ships, but by building the largest and most luxurious ones the world had ever seen. They believed that travelers cared more for comfort and grandeur than for speed alone. They wanted to create vessels so beautiful and so steady that crossing the sea would feel like staying in a grand palace that happened to float. This was a bold and expensive dream, the kind of dream that takes years to build and the labor of thousands of hands to make real. Yet it was a dream that matched the spirit of the age, an age that believed human cleverness could conquer almost anything, even the vast and ancient ocean itself. To understand why such a ship was built, you must understand the pride that filled that time. People had watched machines change the world in a single lifetime. They had seen trains race across whole countries, seen factories rise where fields once stood, seen the night turn bright by electric light. Each new wonder made the next one seem possible. The men who dreamed of the Titanic had grown up in this world of marvels, and they saw no reason why they could not build the grandest moving object that had ever existed. They imagined a ship that would carry the name of their company across the seas like a crown, a ship that would make the whole world stop and look. And so the dream began to take shape, slowly and carefully, in the minds of powerful and ambitious men who believed that nothing was beyond their reach. What makes this beginning so quietly heavy is that no one then could see how it would end. They saw only the promise, the glory, the comfort, the pride. They saw a ship that would last for many years, carrying happy travelers back and forth across the ocean for decades to come. They did not see the ice waiting in the dark waters of the north. They did not see the cold night that would gather all their hopes and pull them under. In the bright light of those early days, the Titanic was meant to last forever, a symbol of everything people believed they could achieve. And to follow her story honestly, we must first stand with them in that bright light before the shadows came, and meet the men whose dreams gave her shape. The story of the Titanic truly begins with a small group of men who had the money, the vision, and the will to build something enormous. At the heart of it all stood the White Star Line, a famous British shipping company with a long history of carrying passengers across the Atlantic. By the early years of the 20th century, the White Star Line had a fierce rival, another great British company called the Cunard Line. These two companies had been competing for years, each trying to win the loyalty and the money of the travelers who crossed the sea. The contest between them shaped the whole industry, pushing both sides to build ever larger and finer ships. To understand the Titanic, you have to understand this rivalry, because the Titanic was born as an answer to it. The trouble for the White Star Line began when Cunard launched two stunning new ships, the Lusitania and the Mauretania. These vessels were fast, faster than anything else on the ocean, and they won great fame for their speed. They crossed the Atlantic in record time, and the public adored them. The White Star Line knew it could not easily beat them at speed, for chasing speed alone was costly and uncertain. So the leaders of the company made a clever and bold decision. Instead of trying to be the fastest, they would try to be the largest and the most luxurious. They would build ships so grand and so comfortable that people would choose them, not for how quickly they crossed, but for how wonderful the crossing felt. The man who pushed this vision forward most strongly was Joseph Bruce Ismay, the chairman of the White Star Line. Ismay was a tall and serious man, born into the shipping business, for his father had built the company before him. He carried himself with the confidence of someone used to wealth and command, and he believed deeply in the future of his company. He wanted the White Star Line to be remembered as the grandest name on the sea. It was Ismay who imagined a trio of giant ships, sister vessels that would dominate the Atlantic crossing for years to come. The Titanic would be the second of these three great sisters, and in many ways, she would become the most famous ship in all of history. The dream took its first real shape one evening at a grand dinner. Ismay met with one of the most powerful shipbuilders in the world, a man named Lord Pirrie, who controlled the great shipyard in Belfast, where the company's vessels were built. Over that dinner, the two men sketched out their bold idea. They would build ships nearly 900 feet long, far larger than anything afloat. They would fill them with comforts never before seen at sea, with fine dining rooms and grand staircases, and rooms as elegant as those in the best hotels. The plan was so ambitious that it would take years and an enormous fortune to complete. Yet both men believed it could be done, and both believed it would make their names live forever. To turn this dream into reality, they needed brilliant designers, and here another important man enters the story. His name was Thomas Andrews, a young and gifted naval architect who worked at the Belfast shipyard. Andrews was the nephew of Lord Pirrie, and he had risen through the company by his own talent and hard work. He was known as a kind and thoughtful man, well liked by the workers, who often walked the shipyard floor and spoke with the men who built the vessels. Andrews understood ships in a deep and careful way, down to the smallest rivet and the thickness of every steel plate. He poured his heart into the design of the Titanic, working long hours to make her as fine and safe as he believed a ship could be. He would come to know the Titanic better than any living person, and he would sail aboard her on her first voyage to watch over every detail. These were the men who gave the Titanic her shape, but they were not the only ones with a stake in her. Behind the White Star Line stood an even greater financial power, a wealthy American businessman whose money helped make these enormous ships possible. The cost of building such a vessel was beyond what most companies could afford alone, and so great fortunes were poured into the project. This was the way of the age, when a few powerful men could gather enough wealth to build wonders that whole nations might struggle to fund. The Titanic was not only a ship, she was a symbol of the money, the ambition, and the pride of the people who created her. What is striking about all these men is that they were not foolish or careless dreamers. They were intelligent and experienced, men who had spent their lives in the business of the sea. They believed in what they were building, and they believed it would be safe. They did not set out to create a tragedy. They set out to create a triumph, the finest ship the world had ever seen, a vessel that would carry their dreams and their fortunes across the waves for many years. And as their plans were finished and the drawings were complete, the time came to turn paper and ambition into solid steel. For that, they needed thousands of strong hands and a great yard by the water in the city of Belfast, where the real and dangerous work of building the Titanic would begin. In the city of Belfast, in the north of Ireland, there stood one of the largest shipyards in the world. It was owned by a company called Harland and Wolff, the same company that Lord Pirrie controlled and where Thomas Andrews worked. This yard was a vast and roaring place, spread along the edge of the water, filled with towering iron frameworks and the constant noise of labor. To build the Titanic and her sister ships, the yard had to grow even larger. Special new structures were raised, enormous frameworks of steel that towered over the ground like the bones of some great beast. Beneath these frameworks, the ships would be built, slowly rising plate by plate until they became the giants their makers imagined. To walk into this yard was to walk into a world of iron, fire, and ceaseless human effort. The work began with the keel, which is the long backbone of a ship that runs along its very bottom. From this backbone rose the great curved ribs of the hull, the framework that would give the ship her shape. Thousands of workers swarmed over the rising structure, climbing the scaffolding, carrying tools and materials high into the air. The Titanic grew taller and longer over many months, until her steel skeleton blocked out the sky for those who stood beneath her. It is hard to imagine the size of the thing taking shape. She was longer than the tallest buildings of that age were high, and when she was finished, she would weigh more than 40,000 tons. Building her was like building a small steel city, and it took the labor of many thousands of men working day after day. The sounds of the shipyard never stopped. The air rang with the sharp, endless beating of hammers, for the steel plates of the hull were joined together with rivets, which are short metal bolts driven into holes and then pounded flat to lock two plates as one. Teams of men worked together to set these rivets, heating them until they glowed red hot, then carrying them quickly to where they were needed. One man would hold the glowing rivet in place while others hammered it tight before it cooled. The Titanic held more than 3 million of these rivets, each one set by hand, each one a small piece of the labor that held the whole ship together. The noise of this work was deafening, a constant storm of metal striking metal that filled the yard from morning until night. The air in the yard was thick with the smell of hot metal, coal smoke, and oil. Sparks flew from the work, and the ground was hard and cold beneath the feet of the men. In winter, the wind came off the water sharp and biting, and in summer, the heat from the forges made the work harder still. The men who built the Titanic were tough and skilled, but the work was brutal and dangerous. They climbed high without the safety harnesses that workers use today. They worked among heavy steel and roaring machines that could crush or maim a careless body in an instant. Accidents were common, and the building of such a great ship came at a real human cost. Some men were badly hurt during the years of work, and a number of them lost their lives. Their names are not as famous as the ship they built, but they too are part of her story, and their effort deserves to be remembered. Many of these workers lived in the crowded streets of Belfast near the yard. They woke before dawn and walked to work in the grey morning light, joining the great stream of men flowing through the gates. They earned modest wages for hard and risky labor, and they took pride in their craft. To build a ship was a skilled trade passed down through families, and many fathers and sons worked side by side in the yard. They knew they were building something special, something larger than anything that had come before. Yet for most of them, it was simply work, the daily struggle to feed their families and keep a roof over their heads. They did not imagine that the ship they were raising plate by plate would one day be remembered all over the world. Slowly, over the course of about 2 years, the hull of the Titanic took its full shape. By the time the framework was covered in its skin of steel plates, she had become an enormous wall of metal rising from the ground, painted and ready to meet the water. The day she was launched into the harbor was a great event, watched by huge crowds who gathered to see the giant slide into the sea. On that day, only the bare hull was finished, an empty shell of steel without engines, without rooms, without any of the fine things that would later fill her. She slipped down the slipway and into the water with a great surge, floating for the first time. But she was far from complete. The launching was only the halfway point of her making, for now the empty hull had to be filled with everything that would turn her from a steel box into a living ship. After the launch, the Titanic was moved to a special dock, where the long work of fitting her out began. This was a different kind of labor, quieter in some places, and just as busy in others. Workers installed her massive engines and her many boilers, the great furnaces that would burn coal to make the steam that drove her forward. They built her decks and walls, her stairways and corridors, the thousands of rooms that would hold her passengers and crew. They laid down floors and hung doors, ran pipes and wires throughout her body, and brought in the fine furnishings that would make her a palace. This stage took many more months of careful work, for there were countless details to finish. And as the inside of the ship came together, the true scale of her grandeur began to appear, room by room, deck by deck, until she stood ready to become one of the most beautiful ships the world had ever seen. To step aboard the finished Titanic was to enter not one world, but many, stacked one above another within her steel body. From the outside, she was a long, dark wall of a ship, with 4 tall funnels rising from her decks, though only 3 of them actually carried smoke from her boilers. The 4th was added mostly for the sake of how she looked, for 4 funnels made a ship appear more powerful and grand. Her decks rose high above the water, and her hull was painted black above and red below the waterline. She was nearly 900 feet long, so long that a person walking from one end to the other on her upper deck would take quite some time to make the journey. Standing beside her on the dock, a person would feel very small, the way one feels standing at the foot of a great cliff or a tall building. The most famous part of the ship's inside was the grand staircase, which served the first-class passengers, the wealthiest people aboard. This staircase was a thing of true beauty, made of fine carved wood polished until it gleamed. It descended through several decks beneath a great dome of glass and iron that let soft daylight fall into the heart of the ship. At the top of the staircase stood a clock set into the wood, surrounded by a carving of 2 figures meant to represent honor and glory crowning time. When passengers came down these stairs dressed in their finest clothes for dinner, the scene looked like something from a royal palace rather than a ship at sea. The warm glow of the lamps, the rich wood, the soft carpets underfoot, all of it spoke of wealth and comfort and ease. The first-class areas of the Titanic were filled with luxuries that most people of that time could only imagine. There was a grand dining room large enough to seat hundreds of guests at once, where fine meals of many courses were served on beautiful china. There was a smoking room for the gentlemen, decorated like a quiet club, and a reading room where ladies could sit in peace. There was even a swimming pool filled with heated seawater, a rare thing aboard a ship in those days, and a special room with steam and heat for relaxing the body. There were elegant private rooms for the richest travelers, some of them as fine as suites in the best hotels on land, with their own private walking spaces along the deck. The people who paid for these rooms wanted to feel that they had left nothing behind on shore, and the Titanic gave them exactly that feeling of luxury floating upon the sea. Below the first-class world lay the second class, and here too the comfort was real, though simpler. The second-class passengers were not the very rich, but they were people of some means, such as teachers, merchants, and middle-class families. Their rooms were clean and pleasant, their dining room was comfortable, and they had their own deck space to walk and take the air. In truth, the second class on the Titanic was as fine as the first class on many other ships of the time. These travelers enjoyed good food and a quiet, respectable journey, with a library and comfortable lounges where they could pass the long hours of the crossing. They were neither at the top nor the bottom of the ship's many worlds, but somewhere in the gentle middle, content with their share of the comfort the great ship offered. Far below these comfortable decks lay third class, sometimes called steerage, where the poorest passengers traveled. These were the immigrants, the families and young people leaving their old lives behind to seek a better future across the ocean in America. Their quarters were plain and crowded, deep within the lower parts of the ship, near the noise and heat of the engines. The rooms were small, holding several narrow beds, and many people shared the limited space. Yet even here, the Titanic was cleaner and more comfortable than most ships that carried the poor across the sea. The third-class travelers had their own simple dining room and their own gathering spaces where they could sit together, sing, and dream of the land waiting ahead. They had paid what little they could to make this journey, and for them, the Titanic was a bridge to a whole new life. Deeper still, below even the third class, lay the working heart of the ship, where few passengers ever went. Here were the great boiler rooms, vast spaces filled with rows of enormous furnaces that burned coal to heat water into steam. The men who worked here were called stokers or firemen, and theirs was perhaps the hardest labor on the whole ship. They shoveled coal into the roaring fires hour after hour in stifling heat, their faces black with coal dust, their bodies soaked with sweat. The boiler rooms were loud and hot and dim, a harsh underworld far from the soft lamps and fine carpets above. Yet without these men and their endless work, the great ship could not move at all. They were the hidden muscle that pushed the floating palace across the sea, working unseen while the wealthy dined in comfort far overhead. It is this layering of worlds that makes the Titanic so striking to imagine. Within a single great hull, the richest people in the world ate fine meals beneath glittering lamps, while far below, poor families dreamed of new beginnings, and deeper still, sweating men fed coal into roaring fires. All of these lives were carried together by the same steel walls, joined for a single voyage across the cold Atlantic. Each world had its own comforts and its own hardships, its own hopes and its own place in the great machine. They were separate, yet bound together by the ship that held them all. And as the Titanic neared the day she would sail, every one of these worlds was about to be filled with living, breathing people, all of them trusting that this magnificent ship would carry them safely to the other side. There was one thing about the Titanic that people spoke of more than almost anything else, and it shaped the whole way they thought about her. People believed she could not sink. This belief was powerful and widespread, and it grew from the way the ship was built. The makers of the Titanic had designed her with special features meant to keep her safe even if her hull was damaged. Because of these features, many people, both aboard the ship and on shore, came to think of her as practically unsinkable. This was not an official promise written into any contract, but it was a feeling that spread through the public mind. It made people trust the ship completely. And that trust, as we shall see, would shape many of the choices made on the terrible night ahead. To understand this belief, you have to understand how the Titanic was built to survive damage. Down at the bottom of the ship, her hull was divided into 16 separate sections by tall walls running across her width. These walls were called bulkheads, and they were meant to act like the walls between rooms. The idea was that if the ship was damaged and water poured in, the water would be trapped inside one or two of these sections. The doors between the sections could be closed, sealing off the flooded part and keeping the rest of the ship dry. In theory, the Titanic could stay afloat even if several of these sections filled with water. This clever design made her seem far safer than older ships, and it gave people great confidence in her strength. There was, however, a hidden weakness in this design, one that almost no one thought about. The tall walls that divided the ship did not reach all the way up to the top decks. They rose only a certain height before stopping. As long as only a few sections flooded, this was not a problem, for the water would stay below the tops of the walls. But if too many sections filled at once, the front of the ship would sink lower into the water. And once the bow dipped low enough, the water inside the flooded sections would rise above the tops of the walls and spill over into the next section, and then the next, like water filling one cup after another in a tilted tray. This was the flaw hidden inside the proud design, a weakness that would matter terribly if the ship were ever damaged across many sections at once. There was another matter that would prove even more important, and it had to do with the lifeboats. The Titanic carried lifeboats, the small open boats that people climb into when a ship must be abandoned. But she did not carry nearly enough of them to hold everyone aboard. The ship could carry well over 2,000 people, yet her lifeboats could hold only around half that number, perhaps even fewer. This shortage was not against the rules of the time, for the laws about lifeboats were old and out of date. Those laws had been written when ships were much smaller, and they had not kept up with the giant new vessels. So the Titanic actually carried more lifeboats than the law required, even though those boats could not begin to hold everyone she carried. Why would such a grand and careful ship sail without enough lifeboats for all aboard? Part of the answer lies in that very belief that she could not sink. If a ship was thought to be unsinkable, then lifeboats seemed almost unnecessary, a small backup rather than a true means of saving everyone. There was also a common idea at the time that lifeboats were mainly meant to ferry people to a nearby rescue ship, not to hold every soul at once on the open sea. And there was the matter of appearance, for some felt that too many lifeboats would clutter the clean, elegant decks and spoil the beauty of the ship. So the decision was made to carry only the number that seemed sensible at the time. It was a choice made in confidence, in the bright belief that the ship would never truly need them. Looking back now, knowing what came after, this belief carries a heavy weight. The people who built and sailed the Titanic were not careless or cruel. They simply trusted their creation completely. They had built the largest, finest, strongest ship the world had ever known, and they could not imagine that the sea might still defeat it. This is one of the oldest patterns in all of human history, the moment when pride in our own work blinds us to its limits. The Titanic was a triumph of human skill, and her makers believed that skill had finally outmatched the dangers of the ocean. They were wrong, but they did not know it, and they could not have known it. As the ship was finished and made ready, that quiet, confident belief sailed with her, woven into every choice, waiting for the night when it would be tested against the cold and ancient sea. The morning the Titanic set sail was a bright spring day in the English port of Southampton, on the 10th of April in the year 1912. The sky was clear and the air was fresh, the kind of morning that makes a journey feel full of promise. The great ship lay against the dock, towering over everything around her, her black hull and tall funnels gleaming in the sunlight. Crowds gathered along the waterfront to see her, for she was the talk of the world, the largest ship ever built, about to begin her very first voyage across the ocean. There was a feeling of excitement in the air, a sense of something grand about to happen. People had come to wave goodbye to loved ones, to watch the spectacle, or simply to be part of the great event. The whole port seemed to hum with energy that morning. The passengers arrived in a steady stream, each carrying their hopes for the voyage ahead. The wealthy came in fine carriages and motor cars, dressed in elegant clothes, their many trunks and bags carried aboard by porters. The middle-class families came with their neat luggage and their careful plans. The poorest travelers, the immigrants of third class, arrived carrying everything they owned, sometimes in single battered cases or simple bundles. They had often traveled a long way already, from distant towns and villages across Europe, to reach this port and this ship. For them, boarding the Titanic was the great moment they had saved and dreamed for, the first real step toward a new life in America. Each person who walked up the gangway, rich or poor, was beginning a journey they believed would change their lives. Boarding such an enormous ship was itself an experience to remember. Passengers walked up long covered ramps that led from the dock into the side of the vessel. Inside, the first-class travelers found themselves in a world of polished wood and soft carpets, with stewards ready to guide them to their fine rooms. The crowds of third-class passengers were led through separate entrances down into the lower decks, where their simpler quarters waited. There was a great deal of noise and movement, the calling of voices, the sound of footsteps on the decks, the rumble of luggage being loaded. Somewhere below, the boilers were already lit, and a faint trembling ran through the ship as her great heart came to life. The Titanic was waking up, preparing to leave the land behind and meet the open sea. At last, the time came to depart. The ropes that held the ship to the dock were cast off, and tugboats helped to ease the great vessel away from her place. Slowly, the Titanic began to move, drawing away from the crowds who waved and cheered from the shore. But almost at once, something happened that nearly ended the voyage before it had truly begun. As the Titanic moved through the harbor, the great force of the water her huge body pushed aside caused trouble for the smaller ships nearby. A liner called the New York was tied up at a dock the Titanic had to pass. The pull of the water dragged at the smaller ship so hard that her thick ropes snapped one by one, with sharp cracking sounds like gunshots. The New York began to swing loose, drifting straight toward the side of the Titanic. For a few tense moments, it looked as though the two ships might collide right there in the harbor, before the Titanic had even reached the open sea. The crews acted quickly. The Titanic's engines were used to push water and slow the danger, and a tugboat rushed in to catch the drifting New York and pull her away. The gap between the two ships narrowed to only a few feet before the danger passed. It was a close and frightening moment, and many who saw it felt a shiver of unease. Some people who believed in signs and omens whispered that it was a bad start, a warning of trouble ahead. The Titanic had nearly been struck on her very first day, before she had even left the harbor. Then the moment passed, the ship steadied, and the voyage continued. The Titanic sailed on, leaving Southampton behind, and made 2 short stops to take on more passengers. First, she crossed to the French port of Cherbourg, where more travelers came aboard, including some of the wealthiest people on the entire voyage. The water at Cherbourg was too shallow for the great ship to come right up to the dock, so smaller boats ferried the new passengers out to her, where she waited offshore in the evening light. Then the Titanic sailed on through the night to the Irish port of Queenstown, where she made her final stop. Here, many more passengers boarded, a great number of them poor Irish immigrants leaving their homeland to seek work and a new life across the sea. At Queenstown, the last of the passengers and the last of the mail were brought aboard, and the ship prepared to leave the land behind for good. When the Titanic finally turned her bow toward the open Atlantic and left the coast of Ireland fading behind her, she carried somewhere over 2,200 people aboard. There were the passengers in their 3 classes, and there was the large crew needed to run such a great ship, from the officers on the bridge to the cooks in the kitchens to the stokers in the boiler rooms. All of these lives were now bound together for the crossing, sailing west toward America, across a wide and lonely ocean. The land slipped away behind them, and ahead lay only water, stretching to the horizon in every direction. The great voyage had truly begun. Standing on her decks in the fresh sea air, watching the last of the green coast disappear, the passengers could not have felt anything but hope and wonder. They were aboard the finest ship in the world, and the whole bright future seemed to lie ahead of them across the waves. To truly feel the weight of what was coming, we must pause and meet some of the people who sailed aboard the Titanic, for in the end, her story is their story. The ship carried a remarkable mix of human lives, gathered together from many lands and many walks of life. Among the first-class passengers were some of the richest people in the world, names known across America and Europe. There were business owners and bankers, famous families whose fortunes ran into vast sums of money. These were people used to the finest of everything, traveling with servants and trunks full of expensive clothes. They had booked the best rooms on the ship and looked forward to a crossing of pure comfort and pleasure. For them, the Titanic was a floating extension of the grand world they already lived in. A world of wealth, leisure, and ease. One of the most famous passengers was a very wealthy American businessman who was among the richest men of his time. He was traveling with his young wife, returning home to America. Another well-known passenger was the owner of a great department store, traveling with his wife of many years. There was a wealthy woman who would later become famous for her courage during the disaster, a strong-willed American who refused to give up hope. There was the ship's own designer, Thomas Andrews, who had come aboard to watch over his great creation and note anything that might be improved. And there was Bruce Ismay, the chairman of the White Star Line himself, sailing on the maiden voyage of the ship he had helped to dream into being. These powerful and famous people walked the upper decks, dined in the grand rooms, and enjoyed the luxury they had paid so well to receive. But the Titanic carried far more than the rich, and the greater number of her passengers were ordinary people with ordinary dreams. In second class traveled teachers and clergymen, small business owners, and families seeking a comfortable passage to the new world. Many of them were going to America to visit relatives, to take up new jobs, or to start fresh in a growing land. They were not famous, and history does not remember most of their names, yet they filled the ship with the quiet hopes of everyday life. They strolled the decks in the afternoons, read books in the lounges, and talked of what awaited them on the other side of the ocean. Their journey was less grand than that of the first class, but it was no less full of meaning to the people living it. It was in the third class, however, that the deepest dreams of the voyage were carried. Here traveled hundreds of immigrants from many different countries, people leaving behind hard lives in search of something better. There were families from Ireland fleeing poverty and hoping for work and land in America. There were travelers from Scandinavia, from the Middle East, from across the corners of Europe, all drawn by the promise of the new world. Many of them had saved for years to afford the passage. Some were young men hoping to find jobs and then send for their families later. Some were whole families traveling together, parents with their children, carrying everything they owned. For these people, America was a dream of freedom and opportunity, a place where hard work might finally lead to a better life. The Titanic was the vessel carrying them toward that dream. Life among the third-class passengers was warm and lively in those early days of the voyage. Though their quarters were plain and crowded, the people made the best of their time together. In the evenings, they would gather in their common rooms, and music would fill the air. someone might play a fiddle or a pipe, and people would sing the songs of their homelands and even dance together in the simple joy of the moment. Children ran and played in the corridors, and friendships formed quickly among strangers who shared the same hopes. There was laughter and excitement in these lower decks, the sound of many different languages mixing together. These were people at the start of a great adventure, and despite the hardships they had known, their hearts were full of hope for the future that waited ahead. The crew of the Titanic was its own community as well, made up of hundreds of working people who kept the great ship running. There were the officers and the captain, the skilled men who commanded the vessel from the bridge high above. The captain was an experienced seaman named Edward Smith, a respected and well-liked man who had spent many years at sea. He was nearing the end of his long career, and this grand voyage was meant to be one of his final journeys before retirement, a fitting crown to a lifetime of service. Below, the officers worked an army of others, the cooks and waiters, the stewards who cared for the passengers, the engineers who tended the machines, and the stokers who fed the boilers. There were even musicians aboard, a small band that played to entertain the passengers during meals and gatherings. All of these working people had their own lives and families waiting on shore. When you gather all these lives together, you begin to feel the true scale of the Titanic as a human story. More than 2,200 souls were aboard, each one a whole world of memories and hopes and fears. There were grandparents and newborn babies, the famous and the forgotten, the wealthy and the poor, all sailing together across the same dark sea. They came from different countries and spoke different languages, but they were joined now by the ship that carried them. Most of them had never met before this voyage, and most would never see one another again after it. For a few short days, their lives ran together along the same path, beneath the same starry sky, upon the same cold water. And though none of them knew it, the choices and the chances of a single night ahead would decide which of them would live and which would not. The first days of the voyage passed in calm and gentle peace, just as the makers of the Titanic had promised. The weather was fair, the sea was smooth, and the great ship moved steadily westward across the Atlantic. Life aboard settled into a pleasant rhythm, the daily routine of a floating town. In the mornings, passengers woke in their rooms and were served breakfast according to their class. The wealthy enjoyed fine meals of many choices, while even the third-class travelers were given good and plentiful food, more than many of them were used to at home. After breakfast, people would stroll along the decks, breathing the clean sea air and watching the endless blue water stretch to the horizon. The motion of the ship was so smooth that many passengers could hardly feel they were at sea at all. The hours of the day were filled with quiet pleasures. In first class, gentlemen gathered in the smoking room to talk and play cards, while ladies sat in the elegant lounges or wrote letters in the reading room. Some swam in the heated pool or relaxed in the steam rooms, enjoying comforts rare for any traveler of that age. Children played on the decks under the watchful eyes of their parents and nurses. In second class, passengers read books from the library, played games, and gathered for friendly conversation. And in third class, the warm gatherings continued, with music and singing and the laughter of people sharing a great adventure together. Meals were served at set times, announced by the soft sound of a steward sounding a call through the corridors, and people gathered to eat and talk and pass the long hours of the crossing. The Titanic moved across the water at a strong and steady pace, and with each passing day she went a little faster. The men in the boiler rooms worked without rest, feeding coal into the furnaces to keep the great engines turning. The ship was new, and her crew wanted to see how well she could perform on this first crossing. There was a quiet wish, though never an official plan to break any records, to make a fine showing on the maiden voyage and perhaps arrive in New York ahead of schedule. So as the days went on, more of the ship's boilers were lit, and the Titanic pushed forward faster and faster across the open sea. The vibration of her engines hummed softly through her decks, a gentle reminder of the enormous power driving her toward the distant American shore. At night, the ship became a different and even more magical place. As darkness fell over the ocean, the Titanic glowed with electric light, her many windows shining out across the black water like a small city adrift in the dark. In the grand dining room, the first-class passengers gathered for dinner in their finest evening clothes, the women in beautiful gowns and the men in formal dress. The tables were set with gleaming silver and fine china, and course after course of delicious food was served by attentive waiters. The ship's band played soft and pleasant music, filling the air with gentle melodies. After dinner, people would linger over coffee and conversation, or step out onto the decks to look up at the countless stars that filled the clear night sky above the sea. It was a scene of pure elegance and ease, the very picture of the luxury the ship had promised. For the immigrants in third class, the nights held their own kind of warmth. Gathered in their common spaces below, they continued their music and their songs, their hearts lifted by the nearness of their dreams. Each day brought them closer to America, closer to the new life they had crossed the ocean to find. They talked of what they would do when they arrived, of the relatives waiting for them, of the work they hoped to find, and the homes they hoped to build. Among them, friendships had grown strong over the days of the voyage, and there was a feeling of shared hope binding them together. They did not have the fine rooms or the rich food of the upper decks, but they had something just as valuable: the simple joy of people moving together toward a brighter future. The days slipped by, 4 full days of smooth and untroubled sailing. The voyage had been everything the passengers could have wished for, calm and comfortable and grand. The Titanic had proven herself a magnificent ship, steady and strong, gliding across the ocean with ease. As the 4th full day of the crossing arrived, the ship was well out into the middle of the Atlantic, far from any land, surrounded by water on every side. The weather remained clear, though the air had grown noticeably colder as the ship sailed into the northern waters. The temperature dropped sharply, until standing on the open decks became too cold for comfort, and most passengers stayed inside where it was warm. This growing cold was a quiet sign, a hint of something the people could not yet see. For in these waters, in this season, the sea held a hidden danger drifting silently through the dark. The danger was ice. In the cold waters of the North Atlantic, especially in the spring, great chunks of ice broke away from the frozen lands of the far north and drifted slowly southward into the shipping lanes. These were icebergs, enormous floating mountains of ice, some of them larger than buildings. The most dangerous thing about an iceberg is that most of its great mass lies hidden beneath the surface of the water, with only a small part showing above. A ship might see only a modest white shape ahead, never guessing at the vast hardness lurking just below the waves. The seas the Titanic now sailed through were known to hold such ice, and that year the ice had drifted farther south than usual. The ship was moving fast into a region where these silent giants waited in the dark. Throughout that final full day of the voyage, the 14th of April, the Titanic received warnings about ice. These warnings came over the ship's wireless, which was a new and wonderful invention of the time. The wireless allowed ships at sea to send and receive messages across great distances, tapped out in a code of long and short signals. Other ships sailing in the same waters had spotted ice, and they sent messages to warn any vessels nearby. Several of these warnings reached the Titanic during the day, telling of icebergs and large fields of ice lying directly along her path. Each warning was a small voice from across the dark sea, saying that danger lay ahead. The information was there, carried through the air to the ship, waiting to be heeded. Yet the way these warnings were handled would prove to be one of the saddest parts of the whole story. The two wireless operators aboard the Titanic were busy men, and their main job was not actually to relay safety messages to the officers. Much of their time was spent sending and receiving personal messages for the wealthy passengers, who paid to send greetings and news to friends and family on shore. The wireless was a popular novelty, and the operators had a long backlog of these private messages to handle. Some of the ice warnings that came in were passed along to the ship's officers, but others were set aside or never reached the bridge at all. The system for handling such warnings was loose and uncertain, with no firm rule that every ice message must be delivered at once to those steering the ship. One warning in particular has haunted the memory of the disaster. Late that evening, a nearby ship called the Californian sent a message to the Titanic. The Californian had stopped for the night because she was surrounded by ice, and her operator wanted to warn the Titanic of the danger close ahead. But the Titanic's wireless operator was busy sending the passengers private messages, and the warning came through loud and sudden, breaking into his work. Frustrated and overworked, he told the other operator sharply to keep quiet, for the Californian was so close that her strong signal was drowning out his other messages. The warning from the Californian never reached the bridge of the Titanic. Soon after, the operator aboard the Californian shut down his wireless for the night and went to sleep, leaving no one listening on that nearby ship. Up on the bridge, the officers knew that ice was in the area, but they did not fully grasp how much danger lay directly in their path. The captain had received some of the warnings, and the ship's course was such that it would pass through the region where ice had been reported. Yet the Titanic did not slow down. This may seem hard to understand now, but it was the common practice of the time. Captains believed that they could rely on their lookouts to spot any ice in time to steer around it. They trusted that on a clear night, the white shape of an iceberg would be visible against the dark water, while there was still time to turn away. So the great ship continued at high speed through the cold and starry night, racing toward New York, with the confidence born of long experience and the deep belief that she was strong enough to meet any danger. As the night deepened, the conditions at sea took a strange and dangerous turn, though few aboard understood what it meant. The air had grown bitterly cold, and the sea had become unusually calm. The water was flat and still, without the waves and swells that normally roll across the ocean. On most nights, even calm ones, small waves break against the base of an iceberg, creating a faint ring of white foam that helps lookouts spot the ice from a distance. But on this still night, there was no such warning. The water lay smooth as a mirror, and any iceberg would rise straight from the flat sea without a ring of foam to mark it. There was also no moon that night, leaving the ocean very dark. These conditions, the calm sea and the moonless dark, made it terribly hard to see ice ahead, even for the sharpest eyes. High up on the ship, in a small platform on the forward mast called the Crow's Nest, two lookouts kept watch over the sea ahead. Their job was to peer into the darkness and spot any danger before the ship reached it. On this night, they faced a hard task. The cold was severe, biting through their clothes as they stood exposed to the freezing air rushing past the moving ship. The night was so dark that the line between the black sea and the black sky was almost impossible to make out. To make matters worse, the lookouts had no binoculars that night, for the pair that should have been in the crow's nest could not be found. So they searched the dark with only their bare eyes, straining to catch any shape in the gloom ahead. They knew ice was about, for they had been warned to watch for it carefully, and they peered into the night with all the focus they could give. It was a few minutes before midnight on that 14th of April, the cold and quiet night growing late. Most of the passengers had gone to their rooms, and the great ship was settling into the hush of the late hours. In the warm rooms below, people slept in their beds, or sat reading, or talked softly in the last few gatherings of the evening. The grand public rooms had mostly emptied, and the corridors were quiet. Deep in the boiler rooms, the stokers still worked, feeding coal into the fires that drove the ship onward at her swift pace. On the bridge, the officers kept their watch, and high above in the crow's nest, the two lookouts stared into the dark. The Titanic glided forward through the still black water, her lights shining out across the empty sea, racing through the night toward the danger she could not see. Then, suddenly, one of the lookouts saw it. Out of the darkness directly ahead, a great dark shape rose from the sea, looming up before the ship. It was an iceberg, enormous and close, far closer than anyone would have wished. The lookout reacted at once. He rang the warning bell 3 times, the signal for danger straight ahead, and he rushed to the telephone that connected the crow's nest to the bridge. He called down to the officers and spoke the words that would echo through history, warning them of ice right ahead of the ship. On the bridge, the officer in charge heard the warning and acted instantly. He gave the order to turn the ship hard to one side, trying to steer around the great mass of ice, and he ordered the engines stopped and then reversed to slow the ship's rush. But the Titanic was an enormous ship moving at high speed, and such a vessel cannot turn quickly. There was a terrible delay between the order to turn and the slow swinging of the great hull. For long, agonizing seconds, the ship continued forward toward the ice, only slowly beginning to change her path. The iceberg drew closer and closer in the dark. It seemed at first that she might just clear it, that the slow turn might be enough to slip past the danger. The bow of the ship began to swing away from the ice, and the great white mass passed along her right side. For a moment, it looked as though disaster might be avoided by the narrowest of margins. But the danger was not above the water where it could be seen. It was below, in the vast hidden bulk of the iceberg, lurking beneath the still surface. As the ship slid past the iceberg, the hidden ice beneath the water scraped along her side, deep below the waterline. There was no great crash, no violent blow that threw people from their feet. Instead, there came a strange grinding shudder that ran along the side of the ship, a sound and a feeling that puzzled the people who noticed it. Some who were awake felt a faint trembling or heard a low scraping noise, like something brushing along the hull. Many passengers, especially those high in their warm rooms, barely noticed anything at all, or thought the ship had simply hit a small wave or rough patch of sea. Down in the lower decks, closer to the waterline, people felt the impact more strongly and heard the harsh grinding clearly. In the boiler rooms, the men felt a sudden jolt and saw water begin to burst in through the side of the ship. The brush with the iceberg had lasted only a matter of seconds, but in those few seconds, the fate of the Titanic was sealed. What the iceberg had done in those brief seconds was both subtle and deadly. The hidden ice had not torn one great hole in the side of the ship, as one might imagine. Instead, it had pressed and scraped along the hull, buckling the steel plates and popping the rivets that held them together. Along a long stretch of the ship's side, the plates were bent and the seams between them were opened, leaving narrow gaps through which the cold sea began to pour. The damage stretched across several of the ship's watertight sections at once, the very sections that were meant to keep her afloat. This was the worst possible kind of damage, exactly the thing the ship's design could not survive. Water now flooded into not just one or two sections, but 5 or 6 of them along the front of the ship. The hidden flaw in the great design was about to reveal itself in full. When Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, was called to inspect the damage, he understood the truth at once. He moved through the lower parts of the ship, looking at the flooding sections, and made his careful calculations in his mind. He knew exactly how the ship was built and exactly what she could survive. The Titanic could float with up to 4 of her front sections flooded, but no more than that. Now 5 sections, perhaps 6, were filling with water. As the front of the ship sank lower under the weight of the water already inside, the sea would rise above the tops of the dividing walls and spill from one section into the next. It would happen slowly but surely, section by section, like water filling a tilted tray. There was no way to stop it. Andrews knew, with cold and terrible certainty, that the great ship was going to sink. It was only a matter of time. He brought this dreadful news to Captain Smith. In a quiet conversation away from the passengers, Andrews explained that the Titanic could not be saved. The damage was too great, the flooding too widespread. He estimated how long the ship might stay afloat, perhaps an hour, perhaps 2, but no more than that. For the captain, this must have been a crushing moment. He commanded the largest and finest ship in the world on her maiden voyage, and he had just learned that she was doomed and would soon lie at the bottom of the sea. Worse still, both men knew the terrible truth about the lifeboats. There were not nearly enough of them to hold everyone aboard. Even if every boat was filled to the brim and launched in time, more than half the people on the ship would be left behind with no way to escape the cold and rising water. In the first minutes after the collision, most of the passengers had no idea that anything was truly wrong. The ship had stopped, her engines fallen silent, and the strange quiet that followed felt almost peaceful. Some passengers, curious about the stop, came out into the corridors or up onto the decks to see what had happened. A few who had felt the jolt wondered aloud about it, but there was no panic, no sense of danger. Some even went out and found chunks of ice on the deck, broken off the iceberg as the ship passed, and they played with the pieces or joked about the strange event. The night was bitterly cold, and most people preferred to stay inside where it was warm. The idea that this magnificent ship, this unsinkable palace, might actually be sinking beneath them was almost impossible to believe. And so, for a little while longer, the calm held, even as the sea poured silently into the wounded ship below. Then the orders began to move quietly through the ship, and the dreadful first hour of knowing truly began. Captain Smith gave the command to uncover the lifeboats and to begin waking and gathering the passengers. The crew moved through the corridors, knocking on doors, telling people to put on warm clothes and their life belts and to come up to the boat deck. The life belts were vests filled with material that floats, meant to keep a person up in the water. At first, the crew spoke calmly, not wishing to cause panic, and many passengers did not take the warning seriously. They were comfortable and warm in their rooms, and the ship beneath them felt as solid and steady as ever. It was hard to leave a cozy bed in the middle of a freezing night to stand on a cold deck because of a danger they could not see or feel. So many people moved slowly, half believing it was an unnecessary fuss. As the minutes passed, the crew worked to prepare the lifeboats, which hung along the upper deck of the ship. These boats had to be uncovered, swung out over the side, and made ready to lower down to the water far below. It was difficult work in the dark and cold, and many of the crew had never practiced launching the boats under real conditions. There had been no proper lifeboat drill during the voyage, and now the men had to learn as they went. Officers were assigned to different boats, and they began the task of loading passengers and lowering the boats one by one. The captain gave an order that would shape the coming hours, that women and children should be loaded into the boats first. This was the custom of the time, the belief that the most vulnerable should be saved before the men. And so, the heartbreaking work of separating families began. The wireless operators, meanwhile, were now sending out desperate calls for help. The captain had ordered them to signal for assistance, and they tapped out the distress signals again and again into the night, calling for any ship that could hear. They sent the old distress call and also the newer one that was just coming into use, the signal that would later become famous as the call of ships in danger. They gave the ship's position and pleaded for any vessel nearby to come quickly. Far across the dark water, several ships heard the calls. The closest one that answered was a passenger ship called the Carpathia, which immediately turned and raced toward the Titanic at her best possible speed. But the Carpathia was many miles away, hours of hard steaming through the icy sea. She would come as fast as she could, but the question was whether she could possibly arrive in time. There was a cruel irony in the darkness around the sinking ship. Off in the distance, the lights of another vessel could be seen, a ship that seemed close enough to reach in a short time. This was almost certainly the Californian, the very ship that had tried to warn the Titanic of the ice earlier that night before her wireless was shut down for the evening. The officers of the Titanic saw these lights and tried desperately to signal the other ship. They fired bright rockets high into the sky, flares that burst into showers of light to call for help. They tried to flash messages with a signal lamp, but the other ship did not respond and did not come. Aboard the Californian, those who saw the rockets did not understand them as a call of distress, and with their wireless silent, they never heard the desperate calls for help. A ship that might have saved many lives stayed still upon the dark sea, so near and yet beyond all reach. As the first hour wore on, the truth slowly began to dawn upon more and more of the people aboard. The ship was tilting now, very gently at first, her bow sinking lower into the sea. Those who walked the decks could feel the slope growing beneath their feet, a slight downward angle toward the front of the ship. Water that had been far below was creeping higher, flooding the lowest decks and rising steadily through the ship. In the third-class quarters, deep in the lower parts of the vessel, the danger came soonest and most fiercely, for these were the areas closest to the rising sea. The poorest passengers found water seeping into their corridors and rooms, and they began to make their way upward through the great maze of the ship, trying to reach the boat deck high above. For many of them, the path upward was long, confusing, and hard to find. The slow understanding that the ship was truly sinking spread like a cold shadow through the crowds. People who had laughed off the danger now saw the worried faces of the crew and felt the growing tilt of the deck. They saw the lifeboats being prepared and began to grasp that this was no small matter, that their lives might truly be in danger. Yet even now, a strange calm held over much of the ship, There was, for a long while, no wild panic. People spoke in hushed and worried voices, and many still could not fully believe what was happening. The lights still burned brightly throughout the ship, the band still played, and the great vessel still felt enormous and solid beneath them. It was as though the mind could not accept that something so vast and so grand could simply slip beneath the waves. But the water did not care for their disbelief, and it kept rising, quiet and patient and cold, through the wounded body of the ship. Now came the longest and most heartbreaking part of the night, the loading of the lifeboats and the choices that came with them. The boats hung along the upper deck, and the officers began to fill them and lower them one by one toward the black water far below. The order had been given that women and children should go first, and so the agonizing work of separating families began in earnest. Husbands helped their wives and children into the boats, then stepped back to wait their turn, a turn that for many would never come. Some families refused to be parted and chose to stay together no matter what. Others made the painful decision to send the mothers and children to safety while the fathers remained behind. These were impossible choices made in the freezing dark, with the deck tilting beneath their feet and the cold sea rising ever higher around the dying ship. In the early stages, many of the lifeboats were lowered only partly full. This was one of the great tragedies of the night. The crew, fearing that the boats might not hold their full weight when lowered, or struggling to convince frightened passengers to climb in, sent boats down with empty seats. Some passengers were reluctant to leave the great ship, which still felt safer to them than a small open boat dropping toward the dark sea far below. The warm and brightly lit decks of the Titanic seemed more solid than the frail little boats, and many simply could not believe the ship would actually sink. So boats that could have carried 60 or more people were lowered, with only 20 or 30 aboard. With each half-empty boat that pulled away, precious chances of survival were lost. Seats that could have saved lives drifting away empty into the night. As the minutes passed and the slope of the deck grew steeper, the mood aboard the ship began to change. The calm that had held for so long started to crack as people finally understood the full horror of their situation. There were now far more people on the decks than there were seats in the remaining boats, and everyone could see it. A quiet desperation spread through the crowds. Families clung to one another in their final moments together. Some people wept, while others stood in stunned silence, unable to take in what was happening. The crew worked hard to keep order, and for the most part they succeeded, but the fear was rising along with the water. There were acts of great courage and great kindness in those terrible moments. People giving up their own places to save others, strangers comforting strangers in the dark. The ship's musicians played through all of it, and their story is one of the most touching of the whole night. The small band gathered and continued to play their music on the deck as the ship sank beneath them. They played to calm the frightened passengers, to bring some small comfort amid the terror, and they did not stop even as the situation grew hopeless. They knew they would not survive, yet they kept playing, filling the cold air with gentle melodies as the great ship slowly died around them. None of these brave musicians lived through the night, but the memory of their music has endured ever since. It stands as a symbol of grace and courage in the face of certain death, a reminder that even in the darkest hour, people can choose to bring kindness and beauty to those around them. There were many other moments of quiet courage among the passengers and crew. An elderly couple who had been married for many years chose to stay together rather than be parted. The wife refused to leave her husband and get into a boat without him, saying she would not go where he could not follow. They were last seen sitting together, holding one another, waiting calmly for the end. Thomas Andrews, the ship's designer, helped passengers toward the boats and urged them to save themselves, knowing all the while that his great creation was lost. Captain Smith moved about the ship, doing what he could and releasing his crew from their duties as the end drew near, telling them they had done their best. These were ordinary people facing the most extraordinary of moments, and many of them met it with a dignity that has never been forgotten. Down in the lower decks, the third-class passengers faced the hardest struggle of all. They were far from the boat deck, lost in the confusing maze of corridors and stairways, and many of them did not know the way up. The path to safety led through the upper parts of the ship, and reaching it was difficult for those who started so far below. Many of these passengers were immigrants who did not speak English well, which made it even harder to follow directions or understand what was happening. By the time many of them found their way up to the boat deck, most of the lifeboats were already gone. For this reason, a far greater share of the third-class passengers were lost that night than those of the first and second class. The poorest travelers, who had dreamed the brightest dreams of a new life, suffered the cruelest fate of all. By now, the water had crept high up the front of the ship, and the bow was dipping ever deeper into the freezing sea. The deck tilted at a sharper and sharper angle, making it hard for people to stand and walk. The last of the lifeboats were being filled and lowered, and there were still hundreds upon hundreds of people left aboard with no way off. The truth that had been so hard to believe was now plain to everyone. There were not enough boats, and most of those still on the ship would not be saved. People moved toward the back of the ship, climbing toward the high end that still rose above the water, trying to get as far from the rising sea as they could. The cold was deadly, the water near freezing, and the night still dark and pitiless. The last boats pulled away across the black water, and those left behind could only watch them go and face what was coming. The final minutes of the Titanic above the water were the most terrible of all. As the bow sank deeper, the back end of the ship, called the stern, began to rise higher and higher out of the sea. The great propellers that had driven her across the ocean lifted clear of the water, and hundreds of people clung to the rising deck, climbing toward the highest point as the angle grew ever steeper. Inside the ship, anything not fastened down began to slide and crash toward the front. The strain on the great hull grew beyond what it could bear. The ship had not been built to hold her own enormous weight at such an angle, with her bow full of water and her stern lifted high into the air. Something had to give, and in the end, the mighty steel body of the Titanic could no longer hold together. With a tremendous and terrible series of sounds, the ship began to break apart. The strain split her hull near the middle, between the third and fourth funnels, tearing the great vessel into two pieces. The lights, which had burned bravely throughout the whole ordeal, finally flickered and went out, plunging the scene into darkness. For those watching from the lifeboats out on the water, it was a sight of unimaginable horror. The great ship breaking in the night, her dark shape splitting against the stars. The front half of the ship, already full of water, sank away beneath the surface and began its long fall to the bottom of the sea. The back half, for a moment, settled back toward the water, almost level again, giving a brief and false hope to those still clinging to it. But that hope lasted only a moment. The broken stern soon began to fill with water as well, and it slowly tilted up once more, rising high until it stood nearly straight up and down against the night sky. hundreds of people still clung to it, holding on to railings and anything they could grasp as the deck became a steep cliff beneath them. Then, slowly at first, and then faster, the stern slid down into the sea. It sank beneath the surface, taking with it the people who could not let go in time, drawing them down into the freezing black water. In a matter of moments, the great ship was gone. The largest and finest vessel the world had ever built, the floating palace that so many believed could never sink, had vanished beneath the waves, leaving only the dark and silent sea where she had been. What followed was a sound that those who survived would never forget for the rest of their lives. Hundreds of people were now in the water, in a sea so cold it could kill within minutes. They cried out for help, a great chorus of desperate voices rising across the dark water, a sound of many people calling out together in their final struggle against the deadly cold. The water was just above freezing, cold enough to steal the strength and the life from a person very quickly. The lifebelts kept many of them afloat, but they could not keep them warm, and the terrible cold did its work. The lifeboats, scattered across the water nearby, held the survivors who had escaped the sinking. Many of those boats had empty seats, room for more people. Yet most of them did not row back to help those in the water. This is a hard part of the story to tell, and it must be told honestly. The people in the lifeboats faced a dreadful choice. If they rowed back toward the hundreds crying out in the water, they feared that the desperate swimmers might swamp and overturn their boats, drowning everyone aboard. So most of the boats stayed where they were, listening to the cries from a distance, too afraid to return. Slowly, one by one, the voices in the water grew fewer as the cold claimed life after life. Within perhaps half an hour, the great chorus of cries had faded into silence, and the dark sea grew quiet once more. Only one boat eventually rowed back to search for survivors, and it found only a few still living among the many who had perished. The rest were gone, lost to the cold and the dark. The silence that fell over the ocean after the cries had stopped was perhaps the most haunting thing of all. Where moments before there had been a great ship full of light and life, full of music and voices and dreams, now there was only black water under a sky thick with stars. The survivors in the lifeboats sat in stunned and frozen silence, scattered across the cold sea, surrounded by the dark. Many had lost husbands, fathers, sons, friends, the people they loved most in the world. They did not yet fully grasp all they had lost, for the shock was too great and the cold too deep. They simply waited, shivering in the open boats, looking out into the darkness for any sign of rescue. The night was long and bitterly cold, and they did not know if any help would ever come. Above them, the same stars that had shone over the dancing in third class now shone over an empty sea. In a little over 2.5 hours from the moment she struck the ice, the Titanic had gone from a proud and glittering palace to a wreck on the floor of the ocean. More than 1,500 people had lost their lives in those few hours, in the freezing waters of the North Atlantic. The great ship that was meant to last for decades had survived only 4.5 days at sea. All the pride, all the ambition, all the belief that human skill had finally conquered the ocean had been answered by a single silent mountain of ice in the dark. The sea had shown, as it always does in the end, that it is far older and far greater than anything people can build. And now those who had escaped sat waiting in the dark, hoping against hope that somewhere out across the black water, a rescue ship was racing toward them through the night. Through the long hours that remained until dawn, the survivors waited in their lifeboats upon the freezing sea. They were scattered across the dark water, cold beyond anything most of them had ever known. Many were thinly dressed, having left the ship in whatever they had been wearing or able to grab, and they had no protection from the bitter night air. People huddled together for warmth, sharing what little they had. Some of the boats were crowded and others nearly empty, for in the chaos, the loading had been uneven. The survivors rowed gently or simply drifted, trying to stay together and to keep watch for any sign of help. Around them lay the wreckage of the ship and the terrible quiet of the sea. Among them were people who had lost everything, who had watched their loved ones disappear into the dark, and who could only sit in silent grief and wait. The cold was a constant enemy through those hours. The temperature was below freezing, and the people in the open boats had no shelter from it. Some of the survivors did not live to see the morning, dying of the cold even in the boats that had saved them from the water. Mothers held their children close to keep them warm, and strangers leaned against one another to share their body heat. Time seemed to stretch on endlessly in the dark. There was no land in sight, no other ship that they knew of, only the wide black ocean and the stars wheeling slowly overhead. The survivors did not know whether their distress calls had been heard, whether anyone was coming, or whether they would simply drift until the cold took them too. All they could do was hold on, hour after freezing hour, and hope that the dawn would bring rescue rather than only more empty sea. Far across the water, the Carpathia was racing toward them as fast as she could go. This was the passenger ship that had heard the Titanic's distress calls and turned at once to help. Her captain had pushed his ship to her very limits, driving her through the same dangerous ice fields that had doomed the Titanic, taking great risks to reach the survivors in time. The crew of the Carpathia prepared their ship to receive the rescued, readying blankets, hot drinks, and warm rooms, and posting extra lookouts to watch for ice along the way. All through the night, the Carpathia steamed northward through the dark and dangerous waters, her engines straining, her people anxious and ready. She was many miles away when she first heard the call, and the journey took hours, but she came on as fast as any ship could. She was the one hope of the survivors, racing through the night toward the scene of the tragedy. As the first faint light of dawn began to touch the eastern sky, the survivors in the lifeboats saw a wonderful sight. The lights of the Carpathia appeared on the horizon, drawing closer across the water. Help had come at last. The ship arrived at the scene as the sun was rising, and in the growing light, the survivors could finally see the world around them. They saw a sea dotted with great icebergs and floating fields of ice. The very dangers that had destroyed their ship, now revealed in the cold morning light. The Carpathia carefully made her way among the ice and began the work of picking up the survivors from the scattered lifeboats. One by one, the boats came alongside the rescue ship, and the cold and exhausted people were helped aboard. They were wrapped in blankets, given warm food and drink, and led to shelter from the cold. The rescue took several hours, as the Carpathia gathered up the survivors from all the scattered boats. In the end, she took aboard around 700 people, the only ones who had survived from the more than 2,200 who had sailed on the Titanic. As the survivors came aboard and looked around them, the full scale of the loss began to sink in. Husbands searched for wives who were not there. Parents looked for children who had been lost, and friends found that those they had traveled with were gone. The decks of the Carpathia filled with grief, with weeping, and with the stunned silence of people who could not yet believe what had happened. They had survived, but they had survived a horror, and many of them had lost the people they loved most in the world. The relief of rescue was mixed with the deepest sorrow. Once all the survivors had been gathered and the search showed that no others remained alive, the Carpathia turned and made her way toward New York, the city that had been the Titanic's destination. The voyage to land took several days, and they were days of mourning aboard the rescue ship. The survivors slowly came to terms with what they had been through, sharing their stories, comforting one another, and grieving their dead. Meanwhile, news of the disaster had begun to reach the world through the wireless, and as the Carpathia steamed toward New York, the whole world was waking to the shocking news. At first, the reports were confused, some even claiming that everyone had been saved and the ship was being towed to safety. But slowly, the dreadful truth emerged that the great Titanic had sunk and that more than 1,500 people had been lost. When the Carpathia finally reached New York, an enormous crowd had gathered at the dock to meet her. Thousands of people waited in the rain, desperate for news of their loved ones, hoping against hope to see a familiar face among the survivors. The scene was one of great emotion, of joyful reunions for the lucky few, and of crushing grief for the many who learned that those they waited for would never return. The survivors came down the gangway into a world that had been shaken by the news of the disaster. They had crossed the ocean expecting a grand arrival on the finest ship in the world, and instead they arrived as the broken survivors of a great tragedy, carried by a different ship entirely. The dawn that had brought their rescue had given way to days of grief, and now they stepped back onto land, forever changed by the long, cold night they had survived. The sinking of the Titanic sent a wave of shock and grief all around the world, and it changed many things in the years that followed. People could hardly believe that such a disaster had happened, that the grandest and supposedly safest ship in the world had sunk on her very first voyage, taking so many lives. There was deep mourning, but there was also a powerful desire to understand what had gone wrong and to make sure such a tragedy could never happen again. Official investigations were held, both in America and in Britain, where survivors and crew members told their stories and experts examined every detail of the disaster. These inquiries sought to learn the lessons of the Titanic, to find the causes of the loss, and to recommend changes that would protect the lives of those who sailed the seas in the future. From the lessons of the Titanic came important changes that have saved countless lives in the years since. The most obvious lesson was about the lifeboats. New rules were made requiring that every ship carry enough lifeboats for every single person aboard, so that no one would ever again be left behind for lack of a place in a boat. There were also new rules about lifeboat drills, so that passengers and crew would know what to do in an emergency, and the boats could be launched quickly and properly. The use of the wireless was changed as well, with the requirement that ships keep their wireless staffed at all times, so that a distress call could never again go unheard because the operator had gone to sleep. An international ice patrol was created to watch the North Atlantic for icebergs and warn ships of the danger, so that the silent mountains of ice would no longer take ships by surprise. For many years after the sinking, the Titanic lay forgotten on the floor of the ocean, far beyond the reach of anyone. The wreck rested in the cold, dark depths, more than 2 miles below the surface, in a place so deep that no human could go there. People knew roughly where she had gone down, but the technology to find and reach such a deep wreck did not yet exist. So the Titanic remained hidden in the darkness, her exact resting place a mystery, kept by the sea she had tried to cross. Decades passed, and the world changed in countless ways, but the great ship lay undisturbed in her deep and silent grave. She became a legend, a story told and retold, a symbol of human pride and the power of nature. Yet for over 70 years, no one had ever seen her since the night she sank beneath the waves. Then, more than 70 years after the disaster, the Titanic was finally found. A team of explorers using new deep-sea technology searched the ocean floor and at last discovered the wreck lying in the darkness far below. They sent down special cameras and small craft that could withstand the crushing pressure of the deep. And for the first time since that cold night, human eyes looked upon the Titanic once more. They found her broken in 2 pieces, just as she had split apart on the surface, the 2 halves lying some distance from one another on the ocean floor. Around the wreck lay a great field of scattered objects, everyday things that had fallen from the ship as she sank, dishes and bottles and personal belongings resting in the dark. The discovery moved people deeply, for it brought the long-lost ship back into the light of human memory. The wreck of the Titanic, resting in the deep, has slowly changed over the long years beneath the sea. The cold, the pressure, and tiny living things in the water have all worked upon the steel of the ship, slowly eating away at her body. Strange formations hang from her rusting decks, like long icicles of rust, formed by the bacteria that feed upon the iron. Bit by bit, over the long decades, the sea is taking the Titanic back, and one day, far in the future, little of her may remain. Yet even as she fades, she rests in peace at last, in the silent dark where no storms reach and no ice drifts. Many people feel that the wreck should be left undisturbed, treated as a grave for the many who died there, a quiet resting place that should be honored rather than disturbed. The story of the Titanic has stayed with the world for more than 100 years, and it is worth asking why it holds such a lasting place in the human heart. Part of it is the sheer scale of the tragedy, the great loss of life in a single terrible night. Part of it is the powerful lesson within the story, the way human pride and confidence were humbled by the simple force of nature. The Titanic was called unsinkable, and in that very word lay the seed of the tragedy, the dangerous belief that people had finally mastered the sea. But more than anything, the story endures because of the people. It is the human stories of that night, the courage and the love, the sacrifice and the loss, that make it impossible to forget. The Titanic reminds us of how fragile our greatest works can be, and how the human spirit can shine even in the darkest hours. And so we come to the end of this long journey, having traveled together from the first dreams of a great ship to the silent wreck that rests on the ocean floor. We have walked through the roaring shipyard and the glittering decks, through the calm days at sea and the terrible cold night, through the loss and the grief and the lessons that followed. It is a story that asks us to remember gently and with care all those who sailed upon the Titanic and all that they hoped for. Now let your thoughts grow soft and quiet, like the deep where the great ship sleeps. Imagine her resting far below, in water so still and so dark, beyond the reach of storms and ice, beyond all hurry and all noise. She lies there in the deep silence, slowly becoming part of the sea, at peace at last after her single restless voyage. Above her, the wide ocean rolls on, calm and endless, and the stars still shine over the place where she went down. Let that quiet image carry you now toward your own rest, soft and warm and safe. Thank you for staying with me through this long and gentle telling. Sleep well, dear listener, and may your rest be deep and peaceful.